It is July 20th, 2023, somewhere in Cotonou, Benin Republic. The European Union's Commissioner for International Partnerships, Jutta Opelainen, stands at a podium in Benin's commercial capital. Behind her, the flags of 27 European nations. She announces something huge: 63.8 million euros in budget support for Benin's government through a newly designed program. She described Benin as a key partner for stability in West Africa. In Paris, France was already moving to deepen security cooperation with Benin, including new surveillance and airport capabilities for its army. Around this period, the US Congressional Research Service quietly updated its Benin brief. The language is precise: an emergent US security partner in West Africa. That phrase doesn't appear by accident. It is a designation. It means strategically important. All of this happening in the same time frame as something is coming up at the port of Seme, just east of Cotonou. You see, Chinese engineers are running final tests on a pipeline, 1,200 miles of steel stretching from Niger's interior to Benin's Atlantic coast. This was Chinese funded and Chinese built. Within months, the first barrels of oil will flow. 4 powers, 1 country, intense competition. Now, jump forward to early December 2025. Gunfire in Cotonou. Soldiers storm the presidential palace. A coup attempt. It fails. President Talon remains in power. Within hours, France, the United States, the European Union, and even regional bodies condemned the attempt, while Nigeria sent jets and troops to, quote, help restore order. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. Why does a failed coup in Benin trigger immediate responses from Washington, Paris, Brussels, Beijing, and even Abuja? Benin has about 14 to 15 million people. It's roughly the size of Pennsylvania in the United States. It's not rich. It doesn't have massive oil reserves or rare earth minerals. Most people can't even find this country on a map. So, why are the world's major powers competing over this country? Let's start with the basics. Benin, you see, is a thin strip of West African coastline, 75 miles of Atlantic shoreline. It's wedged between 3 much larger neighbors. To the east, there is Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and one of its largest economies. 220 million people. It is the continent's biggest oil producer, a regional giant that generates more GDP than many African nations combined. To the north, there is Burkina Faso and Niger, landlocked Sahel countries whose governments have kicked out Western powers amid jihadist violence, which is spreading like wildfire. And to the west, there is Togo, another small coastal nation, also a former French colony. On paper, Benin shouldn't matter much. It has some cotton exports, modest oil production, and a few mineral deposits. Nothing extraordinary, but here's what the map doesn't immediately show you. Benin is a connector. Much of Nigeria's imports don't come through its main port in Lagos. They come through Cotonou, Benin Republic. Yeah, it turns out that sometimes it's quite cheaper to route cargo through Benin, and sometimes it's faster, and sometimes, even often actually, Nigerian importers are avoiding customs fees in Lagos by bringing in goods through Cotonou, then moving them overland into Nigeria. The informal trade here is worth billions every year, flowing through a country most of the world ignores. Benin's ports at Cotonou isn't just serving Benin, it is serving Nigeria's economy. It is serving landlocked Niger and Burkina Faso, which need access to the ocean. It is serving regional trade networks that connect coastal West Africa to the Sahel interior. Benin, therefore, is a gateway. And gateways, you see, in geopolitics are always strategic. But geography alone doesn't explain what happened in July 2023. Geography is constant, it doesn't change. So something else must have shifted. And yeah, something did. The year 2024 changed everything. That is the year the China-backed Niger-Benin oil pipeline came online. carrying roughly 90,000 to 110,000 barrels per day toward Benin's Atlantic coast. This was Chinese funded and built by Chinese engineers. And here's why this matters. Niger is landlocked completely. It has significant oil reserves, but for decades, it had no way to export that oil efficiently. Then in 2023, Niger experienced a military coup. The new government expelled French troops, cancelled security agreements with Western powers, and began moving away from Western security partners toward alternative backers like Russia, while also relying even more on China through the pipeline deal. Benin doesn't own Niger's oil. Benin didn't discover it, but Benin controls the exit valve. Every barrel that flows to global markets passes through Benin's territory. Transit fees go to Benin's government. Jobs at the port go to Beninese workers. Economic activity concentrates in Benin's coastal cities. And more importantly, it gives them leverage. If you want to influence Niger's oil exports, you have to deal with Benin. If you want to cut off Niger's revenue, you have to go through Benin. If you want access to the energy flowing out of the Sahel, Benin is the choke point. The pipeline transformed Benin from a regional trade corridor into an energy choke point. And energy choke points attract a lot of attention. But there's also another reason the pipeline matters. Look at what's happening north of Benin.
If today it pleased some elements of our armed forces to conclude that it would end their intervention, do I really have a choice? I submit to it, because I do not wish any blood to be shed to keep me in power.
West Africa has been changing since 2020. Mali in 2020, military coup. The democratically elected president is overthrown, detained, and forced to resign. And then 2021, Guinea, another coup. Chad's president is assassinated in battle. His son takes over in what amounts to a dynastic military takeover. 2022, Burkina Faso experiences 2 military coups, 2 in 1 year. The first group is overthrown by a second coup before the calendar even changes. 2023, Niger. The presidential guard detains the elected president and declares military rule. Weeks later, Gabon's military seizes power after a disputed election. That is 6 successful coups in 3 years, all in West Africa, all in countries that border or are near Benin. But military coups are just the surface of the crisis. The real threat is moving. Jihadist groups. Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, and their affiliates are pushing south from the Sahara Desert. Burkina Faso has lost control of large portions of its territory. Armed groups operate freely across vast regions. Niger's northern provinces are war zones. Mali's government barely controls anything beyond Bamako, the capital. And the violence is spreading fast, south, toward the coast, toward Benin. In 2021, Benin reported a concerning terrorist attack. Armed militants crossed from Burkina Faso into Benin's northern Alibori region. They attacked a village there, killed civilians, then disappeared back across the border. By 2024, these incursions weren't isolated incidents anymore. They were routine. Jihadist groups were testing Benin's defenses, probing for weakness, looking for new territory to claim as the Sahel burns. And here's the strategic calculation for Western powers. Benin seems to be the last firewall. If Benin holds, the jihadist threat stays north. If Benin falls, the entire coastal corridor from Senegal to Cameroon becomes vulnerable. Cotonou's port, which handles billions in trade, could become a jihadist access point. The Gulf of Guinea, already plagued by piracy, would face a new security threat. This is why the US Congress now describes Benin as, quote, an emergent security partner. That phrase is a diplomatic code. It means a country we cannot afford to lose. But even before jihadist violence spilled clearly into northern Benin, with the first Islamic-linked attack recorded in 2019 and regular cross-border raids by 2021, the United States had already embedded Special Forces trainers with Beninese units starting in 2019. It is almost as if they knew a day like this would come. Now, hang on a second. Did I know? Well, The European Union on its part launched the European Peace Facility in 2021. Benin received about 35 million euros in EPF military support in 2023 to 2024. Vehicles, communication systems, surveillance technology. France promised radar systems, helicopters, and counter-terrorism training. Now, when you look closer, you will see that they are not helping Benin out of charity. They are protecting their strategic interest in the Sahel region. But Western powers aren't the only ones who notice Benin's importance. While Washington sends military advisors and Paris sends helicopters, Beijing sends construction crews. China has invested heavily in Benin over the past 2 decades. The Niger-Benin oil pipeline, Chinese funding, Chinese engineering, major infrastructure projects including a planned multi-billion-dollar railway, there are new roads linking Benin's interior to the coast. All of these are Chinese development deals. According to one estimate, China has extended roughly $536 million in loans to Benin since 2000. In 2024, China even donated artillery to Benin's army. This is significant, not just economic ties, but military cooperation. Some analysts even talk about a, quote, Benin model, which is China's Africa strategy distilled into a single case. Build critical infrastructure, create economic dependence, then gain influence without deploying a single soldier. But China isn't the only rival power cycling here. Russia, operating through the Wagner Group, recently rebranded as Africa Corps, has established a military presence across the Sahel. After the coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, Russian mercenaries replaced French troops. Moscow now operates in 3 countries that border Benin. The December 2025 coup attempt raised questions in Western intelligence circles. Was there Russian involvement? Well, no hard evidence has emerged publicly, but the West is paranoid since losing Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and then there is Nigeria. For Abuja, Benin's stability isn't just important, it is existential. Much of Nigeria's imports flow through Cotonou. Nigerian businesses depend on that corridor. If Benin were to fall under what Nigerian officials call, quote, adversarial forces, it would constitute a direct national security threat. Nigeria cannot allow hostile powers to control its economic backdoor. So, the chessboard is clear. France wants to preserve its historical influence in its former colony. The United States, on its part, wants a stable security partner in a region spinning into chaos. China wants infrastructure access and expanding trade routes. Russia, well, it wants to extend its Sahel foothold into coastal states. And this is why critics in the region accuse Nigeria of acting in lockstep with Western interest. Benin is the board. Everyone is playing, but there's a problem nobody wants to talk about. President Patrice Talon took office in 2016. Before entering politics, he was a cotton magnate, one of Benin's wealthiest men. He campaigned on economic reform and political renewal. He wanted fresh start for his people, new leadership. But what he delivered was something quite different. Opposition leaders were arrested on charges that human rights groups called dubious. Several media outlets faced pressure to self-censor. Election rules were rewritten systematically to exclude rival parties. By 2021, when Benin held parliamentary elections, only 2 parties were allowed to compete. Both were allied with Talon. Human Rights Watch documented the abuses. Amnesty International raised alarms. International observers used phrases like creeping authoritarian tendencies, and some called it democratic backsliding, and yet US security assistance continues to flow. The European Union had already committed hundreds of millions of euros in development and budget support to Benin's government over its 2021 to 2027 programming cycle, and was simultaneously ramping up military aid through the European Peace Facility. France delivered military equipment to Talon's government in late 2025. Why? Because for Western powers, the calculation is simple. Brutal, but still simple. Talon's authoritarianism is manageable. It is predictable. It doesn't threaten their strategic interest. A military government, on the other hand, whose loyalty they cannot count on, is dangerous. A government beholden to Beijing is not manageable. So they choose the devil they know. But look at it from the perspective of ordinary Beninese people. Most Beninese live in poverty. The port at Cotonou generates billions in revenue, but that wealth concentrates among political and economic elites. Yes, Chinese infrastructure projects create jobs, but often those jobs go to Chinese workers, not locals. Western security aid protects Benin's borders, sure, but it also props up a government that imprisons political opponents and restricts press freedom. The December 2025 coup wasn't random. Significant portions of Benin's military were willing to move against Talon. The attempt might have failed now, but the conditions that produced it haven't changed. There's still inequality, there's still repression, elite capture of the state progresses, which brings us back to that week in July 2023.
Soldiers appeared on Benin state television saying they had seized power and were suspending the constitution, accusing President Patrice Talon's government of failing to address worsening security threats in the country's north.
Why did the European Union, France, the United States, and China all make major moves in Benin during the same period? Because by mid-2023, the strategic picture had crystallized. The Sahel was lost, 6 coups, jihadist violence spreading, Russian mercenaries replacing Western troops. France, which had dominated the region for over a century, was being systematically pushed out. Niger's oil pipeline was about to come online, transforming Benin into an energy transit hub. Nigeria's dependence on Cotonou port was growing, not shrinking, and Benin remained the last stable piece on the West African chessboard. The last coastal state that hadn't collapsed into military rule or jihadist insurgency. Everyone saw the same reality almost at the same time, and everyone moved. Strip away the diplomatic language, remove the press releases and official statements. The answer is quite simple. Benin controls access to Nigeria's economy, one of the largest in Africa. Access to Niger's oil, now flowing to global markets. Access to the Sahel southern border, where jihadist groups are probing for weakness. And there's also access to the Gulf of Guinea, one of the world's critical maritime corridors. Whoever controls Benin controls the valve between West Africa's coast and its interior. And in geopolitics, control of choke points is everything. So this is why France, which colonized Benin and granted it independence in 1960, never really left. This is why the United States, with no historical ties to the region, is now sending green berets and allocating millions in military aid. This is why China built $1 billion pipeline and expanded the port. This is why Russia is eyeing opportunities through Sahel instability. This is why Nigeria watches Benin's every political development with alarm. The December 2025 coup failed because Western-backed security forces prevailed this time. But the game continues. Every aid package is a move. Every infrastructure loan is a move. Every military partnership is a move. For Benin, the cost is sovereignty. The country's future is debated in Washington, Paris, Brussels, and even Beijing, more than it is debated in Cotonou itself. Economic choices are shaped by foreign creditors. Security policy is influenced by external partners who have their own priorities. For Western powers, the cost is complicity. They champion democracy while supporting an increasingly authoritarian leader. They promote human rights while providing weapons to a government that crushes dissent. They talk about African freedom while treating Benin as a strategic asset to be managed. For China and Russia, the cost is credibility. They present themselves as alternatives to Western neocolonialism, but their interest in Benin is just as transactional. Infrastructure and influence are modern versions of the same old game. The players have changed, but the game hasn't. And for the 14 to 15 million Beninese people caught in the middle of this great power competition, well, they are learning what every small nation positioned on a strategic trade route eventually learns. Geography is destiny. You don't choose to be a gateway. You don't choose to sit at the intersection of rival empires. You don't choose to control something that others want. But Once they want it, your choices are made for you. Benin is a small country, 75 miles of coastline, modest natural resources, but it sits where everyone needs to be, and that position makes it worth fighting over. This is why world powers want Benin Republic, not for what it is, but for where it is. And until the map changes, neither will that reality.